Hey, folks, welcome to the pre-show. That is what we are, who we are, and why we are for the first 2.5 minutes until we go live over on Odyssey Radio at 3 minutes after the top of the hour. Welcome to the program. I'm liking my voice tonight. It feels like it has timbre, but that's really just something with my vocal cords. The whole, you'll have to excuse me. The whole family has some kind of throat virus right now. So it's a pain in the ass. It hurts. We all got horsey little coughs, but there it is. The annual thing hitting in the middle of the winter. So I've got a little bit of rasp in there, but it's not bad. We've got less than a minute and we go live. I also had my eyes checked today, and my eyes are still wonky from the dilation thing they did. And that was hours and hours ago. So, but they're wonky now tonight. Thank you, Leslie. Hopefully we will. Elderberry, Shotty, he says. All right, we've got about 30 seconds, and we go live over on the radio station at Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com. So everybody stand by. We're going to go dark. Be right back.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey, folks. Happy Wednesday evening. Welcome to the program. I am your host, Scotty Roberts. This is my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. Actually, the Subspace Odyssey Radio Network, as you can see over on the logo in the corner. And if you want to hear this just in its audio format only, you can go over to Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com, and you can hear this show and all the archives of this show and a bunch of other shows that air over on Subspace Odyssey Radio. So check it out at ODYSY radio.com. And if you'd like, come on over and watch the video simulcast. If you're only listening over on the radio, you can join the chat room live over on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And the YouTube channel is the best place that you're going to find this show's chat room. You can access it through Facebook as well. But if you chat on Facebook, not everything's going to be seen by everybody in the chat room, and you're not going to see everybody's chats. So come on over to the YouTube channel. And Leslie Holker, thank you very much for that little $50 super sticker she put into the chat room. I appreciate that. That all goes a long way. Thank you very much. She is an ardent supporter of this show, and I appreciate everything you've done so far, Leslie. Thank you. I appreciate that. And anybody else wants to do that, you're totally welcome to do that as well. So as long as we're talking a little money, let me talk Ruben Fast Horse. I want to thank everybody who's been donating to that. So far, the GoFundMe that we have put up for Ruben Fast Horse has yielded $1,448 in donations. Now, 3% of that is all that is taken by GoFundMe. So you can, if you choose to donate to Ruben, if you've got a few extra bucks, you can throw his way. Only 3% of that is taken. The balance, 97% of what's given goes into directly deposit into Susie and Ruben's bank account. And Ruben, I haven't heard anything in the last few days, but he's stable. He's up and he's walking. He does not have recovery of his linguistic skills, his communication skills, although he can talk, meaning his ability to remember place names with faces. And Susie said, now I did talk to him on the phone about a week ago, and he was very happy to hear my voice, but he couldn't remember my name. I didn't let him struggle. I said, Ruben, Misu, which is Lakota for little brother. And he said, Misu, he said, because that strikes a remembrance with him. And I said, this is your chia, your older brother, Scotty. Scotty, he says, and he remembers when you say it. I don't know how long he remembers that, but and I told this little story before. Susie said he doesn't really know why he is where he is. And he thinks he's just, and he repeated this to me, that he had just come back from a long bus tour going through Wisconsin, different cities in Wisconsin. And he was very confused about the cities. But that was after he said, I'm sorry I was late answering the phone. I just came in from outside where I got off the bus from our bus tour in Wisconsin. We were driving through Wisconsin. And that's not what was going on, of course. And so she said he keeps insisting that. But that's a memory that's resurfacing for him. So I hope and pray too, Leslie, that it all comes back to him. And so they've got a long haul to go. Susie also has, strangely enough, had a severe head injury years ago. And that's given her some neurological problems. And she's been seeing a doctor for a long time, treating that. And then this happened to Ruben. And so one of the things that she can drive, but she doesn't like to in the state that she's in with her own neurological disorder. So she takes a cab to get to the hospital. And it costs her $50 each way to see Ruben and then to go home. And the hospital's about an hour away. And so when that first money started coming in, $300 and $400 and $500, she said, wow, $400. She says, that's 4 trips back and forth from the hospital. And now they have $1,448 in. So that's just an update for you to let you know. They're using that money to help transportation, to help cover some of the bills they have. And so keep giving. I appreciate it. If you've got it and you love Ruben, give it. If you can't give, if you don't have enough money to do that, I know how it is. We're all in tight spots right now. And at least share it. Share that link around. And let me put the link in the channel, in the chat room, so you can see that it's there. You can access that anytime you want. There it is. That is the GoFundMe link, and you can read up all on the updates and everything about Ruben. So I want to thank everybody who's come in there already and done something for Ruben. Yeah, the stress of what's happening with Ruben isn't helping Susie's issues. That's for sure, Leslie. So hello to everybody that's there. Just saw Sarah Youssef come in. Hello, Sarah. And Barbie D, good to see you. And Leslie Holker, of course. We've already been talking. And a few more of you are in here. Elderberry. And we've got a bunch of you watching, but only a few in the chat room. So you come on in over to the chat room if you want to share a piece of your mind. And, of course, we'll do some calling in the captain's cabin. And captain's cabin tonight will last as long as my voice lasts. So you can hear the little raspiness and the little breaking. It all started with the kids brought something home. The kids got it. Rainey got it. Her voice is still, she's breaking all over the place. And we feel fine. We don't feel sick. That's the thing. But we've got, all of us have got laryngitis, I guess you could call it. We've all lost our voices. So the 3 kids today, first day back to school after holiday Christmas vacation. And guess what? They're all home today. And so they'll all be going tomorrow, though. So there it is. And so bear with my voice tonight as we dig into what I think is going to be a really interesting topic. And of course, I do want to share one thing with you here And it is, where did it go? It was an article on, I thought you'd all be interested in hearing this. There's not much meat to this yet, but there were 170 names from Jeffrey Epstein's list that were released today. And on that list, of course, it included Bill Clinton. Now, the list of 170 people who were associated with a lawsuit involving convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein was publicly released on Wednesday, today, according to a judge's ruling. Now, among the names was Democrat former President Bill Clinton, Judge Loretta Preska of the Southern District of New York, ruled in December that the list should be released on January 1st. But the release was delayed in order to allow people to file requests to keep their names private. And the list is composed of names of people who were identified in the civil defamation lawsuit against Epstein. Associate Ghislaine, I never knew how to say her name, right? Ghislaine, I think it is, Maxwell, by Virginia Giuffre, who's claimed to be one of the victims of Epstein's sexual assault crimes. Now, the list of names also includes some of the alleged victims in the trafficking ring. Preska said that it didn't make sense to keep their names unsealed for those who had made public statements about their allegations. So 2 of the persons whose names were to be unsealed were able to obtain extensions in order to fight in court to remain anonymous. Another person included in the list was Doug Band, a former aide for Bill Clinton, who had said in an interview that he had tried to keep Clinton from meeting with Epstein, but that the former president continued to associate with him. Now, other names included in the list were previously known, like Prince Andrew of England, who has faced heinous accusations from alleged trafficking victims, and French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, who committed suicide in jail while awaiting trial for alleged sexual harassment and rape of minors over 15 years old. Now, Epstein was found dead, as we all know, in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019, and officials said that he committed suicide. But the high-profile nature of the sex trafficking ring led to the proliferation of conspiracy theories about his death. And Maxwell was found guilty of participating in the trafficking, and she's already serving a 20-year sentence at a prison in Tallahassee, Florida. Now, Clinton was previously tagged as Doe, D-O-E, like John Doe, Doe 36 in the documents. And so that was a little bit of news that I thought was interesting, because we've all been talking about that for a long time. We've all seen and known that this was coming, and we're hoping that it was coming. So there you go. Leslie Holker, you are spot on. She says, I got to put on my glasses because my eyes are so wonky right now. She says, if you haven't seen Sound of Freedom, I highly recommend it. Guys, I tuned in that movie with Rainey the other night, and we watched that movie. And I kind of got the impression from some of the advertising I was hearing about it, oh, it's just going to be a conservative right movie. And I thought, oh, it's going to be a movie that's like pushing the religious right or something like that, until I looked into it a little bit more and I heard more about it. And Leslie was part of telling me how good that movie was. We watched it. It was phenomenal. It was very well done, very well produced. It's based on a true story of one of the government agents that broke up some pedophile rings. And Jim Caviezel, who you'll know him, he played Jesus in the Passion of the Christ some years back now. He plays the agent in this movie. And I got to tell you, there were times in this movie, that movie broke me up a little bit. And it was hard to hold back tears in certain spots because of the nature of what they were dealing with. And I don't remember the figure, but I want to say it was like $150 billion a year industry, if you call it that, is the pedophile rings. And it's a powerful movie, and it's based on a true story. Yeah, Leslie, it is a sick world when a grown human being can look at a child for sexual purposes. I agree. So this is part of the Epstein thing. There's a lot of talk about how involved he was in this. So We'll see as details unfold on that. I can't make any accusations. All we know is what we hear, and then we got to meter that against what we learn and knowledge that we gain. So, moving from that, let's get into tonight's topic. It's a controversial topic. It's Abraham and YAHWEH. This is just a simple case of male bonding, is what I initially said about this. Here, let me get rid of. I keep this graphic up for people coming in, but let me remove that for now, and I'm going to put up my banner so you all know where you're landing and what you're looking at. So, it's a controversial topic tonight. Abraham and YAHWEH. Now, we all know the stories of Abraham, at least the basis of it. If you ever went to Sunday school or church, you've got an idea of what this stuff is all about. Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldees. His father was the high priest in Haran. The ziggurat there that we've seen the ruins of today in Iraq is the ziggurat that would have existed at the time of Abraham. They do believe. And he was called out, and God promised he would be a father of nations. We know the stories of the birth of Isaac. We know the stories of Abraham taking Isaac up to the mountaintop to sacrifice him because God told him to do that, and how God stops him at the last moment and provides a ram caught in the thicket. We know all these stories. Abraham's nephew, Lot, how Lot went to dwell in the cities of the plain. Among the 5 cities were Sodom and Gomorrah, and how the angels came and rescued Lot and his family from that because God was going to destroy the cities, according to the biblical story. So we know all these things, these superficial mountain peak experiences of the story of Abraham. And what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, it might offend you a little bit. It's going to jar many more people into thinking about what they think they know or what they actually believe. I've got to put on my glasses to read my own notes because I had to go. I had an eye appointment today to look into my cataract issues on my eyes. Yeah, believe it or not, at only 63 years old, I have cataracts. And they're not severe. I can see everything. My color's good, all of that. Everything's a little fuzzy, and it's a little hazy every now and then. Well, they determined today that, yeah, it's advanced enough that you should get it done. And so I've got to meet next Friday with the surgeon and take it from there. So they dilated my eyes, and that's supposed to go away in a couple hours. My eyes have been wonky all day since about 11 o'clock this morning. So bear with me. I need my glasses because I'm a little fuzzy today. So, but let's get into this. Oops, I just turned off the comments. I want to make sure I can see all your comments. Everybody that's here, welcome. Jeremy Hansen, welcome to you. It was actually the conversation you and I had, Jeremy, that prompted me to dig into Abraham, because I started digging a little more into Melchizedek, which we're going to get into, folks. If you've heard that name, Melchizedek is somebody that Abraham came and paid tithes to. And he was the king of Salem, or Shalom, as the Old Testament says. And many have interpreted that as him being the king of Salem, which was the name of Jerusalem. And there's a Hebrew word that puts these two words together, Yaru Shalom, and Yerushalayim. And but there are others who've come along and said that they didn't think he was the king of Jerusalem. He was a king and a high priest. But why is Abraham giving tithes to him? Not much said about him in Scripture. But the New Testament likens Melchizedek, king and priest, to a pre-incarnate Christ, or a comparative anyway. We're going to dig into that in the very near future here. But in the meantime, let's get on to Abraham. This is why I got into this, because I found some very interesting things that I want to talk with you about tonight. And there is a lot of information here. So we'll see if we even get through it all tonight. If we don't, we'll pick it up because we're going to start a little series on this. I think this is something that I really enjoy talking about on this show, and that we've done so many times in the past, is talking about these biblical mysteries and these issues that maybe cause a little bit of pause for all of us, because we go, that's not what I learned in Sunday school. But this makes us all think. And if we reject the textual analysis that I'm going to present you, we should know why we reject it. And so in this way, this whole thing has the capacity to take us to this deeper level of meaning, our own meaning. And the aim here of this presentation I'm going to give you tonight isn't to shield you from anything. It's to present to you this variety of scholarly approaches to the Bible. There's not only one approach, which is what I was taught when I was in the Fundamental Orthodox Baptist Church. But even those who may disagree with this have to know there are more than one way to skin a cat. And the interpretations that we find here might be rejected by you all, but it's based on careful, insightful reading of the biblical text about the story of Abraham. And Josh Kemp, to answer your question, how many places have I been in the Holy Land? I've never been to Israel. That is a trip that is on my bucket list. For all the times I've been to Egypt, 5 times, I want to say, I've never made it over to Israel. And that's someplace I want to go. I have friends there. I have friends who have friends there that live locally. Maybe we'll put together a trip one of these days. Israel is still a safe place to travel, even during the war. Just got to watch out where you're going. But I think, traveling to Israel right now is going to be a little curtailed. But I'm going to make it. I want to make it before I'm too old to enjoy it. But so I hope that answers your question. I've never been. Some of you might find some of this information very convincing. Not necessarily as the only way to understand the biblical narrative, but as another way to interpret it. And one of the beauties of the Bible is that it can be interpreted in many ways that are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Now, when I was in the church and I went to Bible college and seminary, we were taught, there's a verse that says, the Bible is of no private interpretation. That's very true. But interpreting the way text reads, sometimes you really have to understand context. You have to understand the way it was meant to be received by the audience it was written for. It wasn't written for a whole audience 2,000 years in the future. It was written for the people that lived in the day it was written. So in this spirit, I'm going to offer all this stuff up to you. I have no doubt, though, that this is only the beginning of discussion on this stuff, not the end. And I certainly am not the only person that's put an apple on the cart. So there's going to be somebody else come along and do that. So I've got other things I might present you on this same topic. But let's dig into this before I run out of time introducing it. So for centuries, Abraham has been regarded as this paradigm of how a good Jew or a good Christian should behave. Although he was constantly moving around all the time, he pimped off his wife more than once, and agreeing to slaughter your child are not usually highlighted as examples to be followed. But could Abraham be a hero of the Christian coalition, maybe? Alas, family values are not Abraham's strong point. But he does make a lot of money, and he has a private army, and he certainly believes in sacrifice, so long as it's an animal or someone else being sacrificed. So as this might suggest to you, my reading of the story of Abraham is somewhat different from the conventionally pious reading. Go figure, huh? You might know. I always look for the angle, because I think there always is an angle. There's always something else to consider. What we have in the Genesis chapters 11 through 25, the story of Abraham, is, I believe, a story of male bonding. It's the story of a relationship between two males, Abraham and his God, Yahweh. Simply call him Abraham and Yahweh. Although they both changed their names during the story, if you didn't know that. He was Abram, he became Abraham. Yahweh was originally Elohim. And so, although they both changed their names during the story, from the beginning to the end, you see Abraham and Yahweh constantly trying to bluff each other. Now, you might go, I don't interpret it that way. So don't get offended. I'm going to bring up a lot of stuff like this. And I bring it up so you think about it. They were constantly trying to bluff each other. Neither is entirely successful. Each is too clever to be taken in by the other, but they both keep trying anyway, because that's the way guys behave with their friends. So this kind of male bonding has become a cliche to anyone who regularly goes to the movies, reads books. Honestly, honesty and belief are feigned on both sides. Obedience and agreement are often overtly expressed, but in fact, the relationship is based on wary mistrust. This relationship between God and Abraham. It's wary mistrust. It's reinforced by a certain liking and mutual respect, and cemented by a series of implicit bargains and compromises. Sarah says, I think it's more like a marriage than a bromance. You might be right on there. So, as we're going to see as I go through this material tonight, the story of Abraham is a delightful anatomy of a certain kind of male twosome. Two macho characters who come together for their own purposes and go along with each other because of mutual interest, a liking for each other's bluffing, and a certain sneaky regard for each other's deviousness. Now, if I were casting the leads, I'd go for somebody like, I don't know, Michael Douglas as Yahweh and Kurt Russell as Abraham. I think that'd be a great movie to create something like this. And while this is a fun romp into this, I believe that the text presents us with this picture. Now, most readers of the Bible underestimate or understand that the story of Abraham to start at the beginning of chapter 12 with the summons from Yahweh, the so-called call of Abraham. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. That's Genesis 12:1. But the story really begins in chapter 11, which deals with the Tower of Babel as an explanation of why humans were scattered across the face of the earth. So toward the end of chapter 11, we learn that Abraham was apparently born in Ur of a father named Terah. And Ur is not explicitly identified here as Abraham's birthplace, but later in the book of Genesis, Yahweh says he called Abraham from Ur. So he must have been born there. So actually, Yahweh didn't call him out of Ur, but we're going to pass on that for a second. I'll get back to that. By the time of the call in chapter 12, Terah has already moved with his family to Haran. And this move described in chapter 11 is apparently part of Yahweh's strategy of scattering people across the face of the earth, instead of concentrating them in lower Mesopotamia. But Yahweh's later statement that he called Abraham from Ur is really Yahweh fessing up that the move from Ur to Haran was part of his overall strategy. And we're kind of told that when Terah left Ur with his family, he was heading for the land of Canaan, which in today's politic is called Palestine, the land of Canaan. So the stop in Haran is a change of plan. And this change is not Yahweh's doing, but Terah's. So God calls Terah, wants him to move to Canaan. He stops in Haran and goes, it's a pretty good place to sink roots. It's a high priest there. So at this point, with Terah and his family in Haran, Yahweh gives up on Terah. And the paternal familius is too old to move again. So Terah named the city where he stopped Haran, after his dead son. Find that in Genesis 11:28. But Abraham's brother, so indicating that he's so full of sentiment for his current abode that that's where he's going to plant. He's not going any further. And Yahweh simply decides to skip a generation, just as he'll do with the wilderness generation in the book of Numbers with Moses, leaving him on Mount Nebo without taking him to the promised land. Apparently, this is a habit with this God. Instead of proceeding with Terah, Yahweh approaches Terah's sprightly 75-year-old son, Abram at the time, to attend to the unfinished business at hand. But Yahweh doesn't say, it's time to finish the journey you were supposed to make. He says instead, leave your country, relations, your household, go somewhere else. I'm going to show you where to go. Yahweh doesn't even tell Abraham where he's supposed to go. So tantalizingly, he just calls it a place that I will show you. Trust me. So this directive is backed up with an inducement. If you do this, I'll make you literally a household name, and you will be the ancestor of a great nation. A promise is what theologians call, but let's call it an inducement. I don't think it was a promise more than it was an inducement. It's a bit short on detail for a promise. Say, hey, go over here. I'll show you where you're going, and I'm going to make of you a great nation. So many, it'd be like the stars in the heavens. You can't count them. So saying nothing, Abraham simply gets up to go to the land of Canaan. Not Palestine. Palestine didn't exist. So Abraham knows what this unnamed land is and which way to walk. He doesn't ask the way because he knows perfectly well, but he doesn't let on to Yahweh that he knows. Okay, I'll head to where you're going. Now, supposedly, if it's his God, he's supposed to know what's in Abraham's mind and heart. But in the story, Abraham's just like, okay, we'll pack up the mules and the carts and we'll go wherever you lead. I don't know where it's going to end up. And so he goes along for his own reasons. Why, after all, live in your father's city, which is named after your elder brother, when you can have your own place and your own tribe named after you and your own descendants into the countless numbers? Abraham appears simply to obey, but this is far from true. Don't forget, he takes with him not only his wife, but also his nephew Lot, that's Haran's son, and he takes them despite having been told to leave his relatives behind. Genesis 12:1. He still takes them all with him. We worry about whether Sarah counts as a relative, but this might depend on whether we really believe she was Abraham's sister, as he later claims to the Pharaoh of Egypt. We'll get to that. So for Yahweh's part, so far, he's only offered to show Abraham this land. Perhaps he intends to suggest more. Will he give it to him? Perhaps not. He says, I'm going to show you this land. He doesn't say I'm going to give it to you. In any event, Yahweh's offer turns out to be just the beginning of a protracted period of bargaining of the kind familiar to anyone who's tried to purchase a carpet in Jerusalem's old city. Now, I haven't been there purchasing carpets, but I know people who have. I've been in Egypt trying to purchase shawls and rugs and different things like that. And I know exactly what this means. So, indeed, Yahweh's offer soon begins to look suspicious. For no sooner does Abraham reach Canaan than we learn that the Canaanites are in the land. It's Genesis 12:6. Well, you might say, well, who else would be in the land of Canaan but the Canaanites? But these distant lands were supposed to be unoccupied, like Haran was before Terah got there. So these crafty Canaanites must have started, like everyone else, from the plain of Shinar after the Tower of Babel incident. But they must have overtaken Terah and his family when they holed up in Haran. And if this is the land Abraham is supposed to live in, he seems to be a little too late. So after reaching Canaan, and finding it already occupied, perhaps Abraham asked himself whether he should turn back. At least it's logical to suppose that Yahweh thinks this is what Abraham might be thinking. So Yahweh needs to say something quickly to keep Abraham on the hook. So Yahweh now undertakes not simply to show Abraham the land, but to give the land to his descendants. Genesis 12:7. Not to Abraham, mind you, and certainly not to the Canaanites, but to Abraham's descendants. Pretty clever of Yahweh. He doesn't give the land to the people who happen to be around. Better not involve anyone who's there at the time. So it's not difficult to imagine what Abraham must be wondering at this point. How and why did Yahweh let these Canaanites, my new neighbors, get the land first? Did he promise it to them as well? Do they know it won't be theirs for long because Yahweh just gave it to me? Well, my descendants anyway. Jeremy Hansen says, Abraham was a man of conquest and a man of obedience, probably more of the latter. He was a man of obedience, but was there a craftiness about why he did what he did? We seem to understand the whole picture of Abraham and Yahweh and God and how they act. But maybe at that time, there was a whole different cultural understanding of how this relationship was supposed to work. So Yahweh had told Abraham that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through Abraham. And it no doubt occurred to Abraham when he arrived in Canaan and found the Canaanites there to ask himself, how are these nations going to be blessed through me? As Yahweh said they would be. By losing their land to my descendants? Surely that's not going to count, says Abraham to himself. So Abraham's, now I'm speculating, of course, on what Abraham was thinking, but it's rather like when I've speculated about how Joseph, betrothed to Mary, must have felt when he finds out she's pregnant. And of course, we are told in the Bible that she's pregnant with God's son, the Messiah. But Joseph didn't know this. They were betrothed, which was the next best thing to marriage for 1 year. And she ends up pregnant, and it's not his. What's he thinking? Well, what does the story tell us? It says the angel came to Joseph, and he said, Joseph, don't worry about this. The child that your wife, your betrothed, Mary, is impregnated with is the Son of God. It's the Messiah. So don't put her away, which was the soft language for saying he's going to divorce her. He was going to cut off the betrothment and put her away quietly. Because he loved her, he didn't want to embarrass her more than she was. But imagine how he felt for at least a day before he had the angel coming to him in a dream. He believed that Mary had sex with somebody else other than him, and he was probably crushed. So, yet we have him, we're speculating that he probably thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? I got to get out of this. Now, there's no record of him saying that, but I figure if he's a guy, he probably acted like a guy. But the biblical story we're taught is the word of God, so it's supposed to be elevated above what we speculate or think. So anyway, Abraham's response to Yahweh's new offer is rather minimal. He doesn't say, oh, Lord, you shouldn't. I don't deserve this land. Just what I always wanted. Or even how much land exactly will my descendants get? He didn't even ask where all of this leaves him. What's he supposed to do while waiting for his descendants to be given this unspecified amount of land at an unspecified time by unspecified means? So you'd expect that Abraham, if he thinks Yahweh is serious, simply to settle down where he is, begin to produce some descendants who are going to take over the place. But no, instead, Abraham builds an altar. Presumably offers a sacrifice and promptly moves on to Bethel, where he builds another altar, presumably makes another sacrifice, then moves further south. And some animals mark their territory by dropping feces or urine. Maybe patriarchs did it by building their altars. But Abraham doesn't circumscribe a territory. Instead, he moves in a straight line to Egypt, out of the land he's just been promised, or nearly promised, in Genesis. Now, by the way, think of this for a second. We think that these guys were in constant communication with the divine. And I think we forget that they were humans and that their contact with the divine may have been, maybe it was once every 5 years or 10 years or 3 times in a lifetime. And so he hears from God to go here, and he gets there and he just keeps moving. God doesn't tell him, stop, you're on the spot. He goes down to Egypt. So why does he do this? Because the promised land now has no food. Famines are, in the biblical worldview, caused by gods. So we have to wonder why Yahweh brings a famine that forces his protege out of the land he just promised him. Maybe so Yahweh can reassure himself that he's in control of Abraham. You notice God keeps doing this throughout the scripture with all the different characters. He has to keep proving who he is, why he is, and why everybody should worship him. And far be it from me to psychoanalyze God, and I could wait for the lightning bolt, but these are questions. I ask these questions, and I seek earnest answers to these. Maybe Yahweh can reassure himself that he's in control of Abraham, appearing to dictate what the patriarch to be decides of his own accord to do anyway. And so this is a ploy Yahweh resorts to several times with Abraham. So Abraham goes to Egypt. He enters Egypt. But before crossing the border, he says to his wife, Sarah, who we're told is a very good-looking babe at 75 to 80 years old. Now, if everybody lived to be 300 back then, maybe she looked like, a hot chick in her 40s. I don't know, like my wife. Take my wife. Some commentators on Genesis 12, anxious to defend everything Abraham does, suggest that he didn't anticipate the outcome of this ruse. But that's utter bullshit. That's nonsense. Abraham's life is in danger, he says, because his wife is so desirable that he might be killed for her. Remember, this is pretty rustic times. And so he might be killed for her. So it follows that her masquerading as an available woman will inevitably lead to the consequences that do in fact ensue. And Abraham can see perfectly well what's going to happen. I always thought this is a pretty stupid thing for Abraham to do. Why don't you just say, this is my wife, dude? Matter of fact, remember the Pharaoh's response? But it follows that her masquerading leads to the consequences that ensue. And Abraham can see perfectly well what's going to happen. And for the first time, he openly instigates a chain of events entirely for his own personal benefit. He shows no interest in either the offspring God promised him or the land God promised him. He's left the land. He now disposes of his wife. And it's true that she's barren, but Abraham does nothing to find another woman by whom to beget the offspring. So soon enough, we find out what Abraham does want, and it isn't anything he was promised. He wants to be rich. Business beats blessings any day of the week. Being successful at business is a far cry from having to rely on donations, isn't it? So business beats blessings. This is what he wanted. So Pharaoh of Egypt takes Abraham's wife into his house, in quotes. That's a nice euphemism. I think he got into her house, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He's thinking she's Abraham's sister because Abraham said so. And Pharaoh treats Abraham quite nicely. Thank you, Abraham. Thanks for the woman. And it's for her sake. It says in Genesis 12, 15 and 16. So as the patron of his sister, Abraham receives the bride price in return for her. For her sake, he dealt well with Abraham, the Bible tells us. The Pharaoh did. and giving him herds of animals and servants. Now, understandably, Abraham likes this particular deception so much that he tries it again on another occasion. And by the way, remember how Pharaoh reacted? He was kind of pissed off when Abraham said, "That is my wife." So he passes his wife off as his sister to Abimelech, the king of Gerar, and it works again. Abraham gets sheep and oxen and servants and 1,000 pieces of silver. He even passes the idea on to his son Isaac, who passes off his wife Rebekah as his sister to the same king in Genesis 26. It's a generational ruse that they're playing. So Abraham is beginning to look like this unscrupulous entrepreneur, a get-rich-quick merchant to whom long-term land possession and descendants are unimportant. No matter what Yahweh wants for him, he, Abraham, continues to pursue his own goals. He wants to be wealthy. And he thinks this is a far cry from the promises from a divinity. So the Egyptian episode shows, which, by the way, tells you something. It shows that he didn't really trust the story of the divine, and he didn't really believe that that there would be any consequence for not doing what he said. So the Egyptian episode shows that Abraham's and Yahweh's interests are not commensurate. This is going to be a key thread of this whole story. In effect, the rest of the story shows how each of them does his own thing, although they stick together for mutual benefit. Abraham, after all, seems happy with the arrangement, and maybe Sarah is too. They're exchanging a wandering, selfish, and uncaring husband for an appreciative and very rich sugar pharaoh who's not a bad deal. Now, Pharaoh, too, seems happy with the new addition to his harem, and he certainly pays Abraham plenty for it. So who isn't happy? Well, Yahweh's not happy. He believes he's writing the script, not Abraham. So he intervenes to restore this plot, not as pious readers suppose, to save anyone or anything. From what or whom is anyone to be saved? For Sarah's virtue, it's too late, even if she wanted to be saved. So Abraham can only be saved from the terrible fate of getting richer every day without having to work. And Yahweh can only save his own face. He wants Abraham to be in the land of Canaan, thinking about the descendants he's been promised or induced with. So, how can Yahweh get Abraham back there? He can't bribe or otherwise persuade Abraham to leave Egypt, and he can't fool him into it either. So he brings about Abraham's departure by other means. It's the old plague routine, which Yahweh seems to favor for changing the minds of pharaohs. Yahweh brings a plague on Pharaoh and his house. Reminds me of Romeo and Juliet in Shakespeare. A plague on both, a pox on both your houses. So Yahweh brings his plague on Pharaoh and his house. Pharaoh knows that Abraham is the cause. I don't know how he knows this. So he sends Sarah, Abraham, and all that he had away, out. See ya. Get out of my sight. Probably before I kill you. And Abraham and Sarah are thus banished from Egypt. So what's the score at this point? Yahweh wants Abraham in the land of Canaan, but Abraham wants to be rich. A compromise is reached. Abraham will be rich in Canaan. Abram went up out of Egypt, and Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Says Genesis 13, 1 and 2. And our two males are now ready for the next round. Our two males, remember? Abraham and Yahweh. So another conflict arises almost immediately. Everything Abraham does suggests that he's very fond of his nephew Lot, from bringing him from Haran. Contrary to the divine instructions, by the way. Don't bring your relatives. Leave them, Yahweh said. He brought him to Egypt and back. Now, Abraham's general attitude makes the most sense if he believes Lot is his heir. And in any event, Abraham soon realizes that he and Lot have become so rich that the land is too small. This town's not big enough for the both of us to support both of them. And so there's another factor to consider. The other inhabitants of the land are also growing. The place has not only got Canaanites, but Canaanites and Perizzites. Perizzites, not parasites. Double Z-zites. So a lot of the choice of portion. It allows Lot the choice of portion. And Lot chooses the better half, including, however, a place with wicked people, great sinners against Yahweh. Wait a minute, aren't the inhabitants supposed to know Yahweh? And by the way, there's one interpretation that says Melchizedek was actually the king of Sodom, as some people interpret the word shalom in the Old Testament. That's where that comes back in. So Lot chooses the better half. And wait a minute. Are their inhabitants supposed to know Yahweh? Their wickedness, however, is Yahweh's pretext to disliking Lot. So there's a hint of Lot's exclusion from Yahweh's plans. Didn't he tell Abraham already? Leave all your relatives behind, but Abraham brought him with him anyway. It says Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, which implies that Lot did not live there. So as long as Lot is around, Abraham does not worry about the promise of descendants. And this obviously weakens Yahweh's bargaining position. So Yahweh must deprive Abraham of Lot. And accordingly, he undertakes a series of maneuvers intended to do just that. First, the land Lot chooses is blitzed, and Lot himself is kidnapped. When God destroys Sodom, Lot narrowly escapes with his life, but he loses his wife. Well, if he loses a wife and gains a pillar of salt, but that's not a great deal. Lot ends up living in a cave with his 2 daughters, all he has left. And it's hard not to see Yahweh behind the chain of misfortunes. But Yahweh's aims are frustrated, foiled by members of Lot's family. Abraham rescues Lot, and Lot's daughters rescue his posterity. So still, Yahweh makes it clear to Abraham that he'll give him, Abraham and his descendants, the land of Canaan as far as he can see. Not Lot or his descendants, Abraham and his descendants. And this is actually the first time Abraham himself has actually been promised the land. And the attentive reader has to observe that each divine promise differs from the last promise. If you're a deity, you're only as good as your last promise. But that hardly explains why virtually every chapter opens with another promise. Or, we're going to do a new version of that promise I promised you back then. Yahweh must be a compulsive promise maker. You know, he does sometimes, when you read, no offense, Yahweh, when you read these accounts, he seems impetuous, doesn't he? Angry, vengeful, all of that stuff, wrathful, if you don't do what he says. Yahweh must be a compulsive promise maker, a neurotic covenant maker. Making offers, finding out what motivates people is part of his personality. In fact, that's actually his main tactic for controlling humans. Some people, ancient and modern, are fooled into believing he has kept his promises, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Boom, there is the controversy. How does that grab you? This is what it appears to look like. Ask Pliny the Ancient, says Etienne Remy. Good to see you, Etienne. Nice to have you here. When did he meet Melchizedek? Elderberry says, well, I'm not covering that so much in this, but he meets him along the way of all of this when he's going through the promised land, the land of Canaan. The promised land, that's what it's called, the promised land. But this constant promising has little effect with Abraham. Abraham wasn't born yesterday. He's told to wander through the length and breadth of the land now promised to him personally. So how does he react? Not unreasonably. He's unimpressed. The non-Abrahamic population is growing, and since Lot's departure, Abraham has no descendants living in the land. In any case, he's been promised land only as far as he can see. Now, this isn't really very much land for a man with immense flocks and herds and silver. He can't actually see all that far from Bethel, Israel, what is now in Israel. And so when Yahweh invites him to take a tour of the most recently promised territories, Abraham declines, and he moves instead from Bethel to Hebron, some 30 miles south, which you certainly can't see from Bethel. And he builds an altar there, of course. And he decides to stay put. And we observe again that Abraham is a man following his own agenda. And all of his sacrifices cannot disguise his basic disregard for Yahweh's plans. We aren't going to have time to finish this before the end of the radio show. So everybody listening on radio, you come and join us in the captain's cabin, because I'm just going to keep on. We're going to close the show out in a minute, and then we're going to jump right back into this, folks. So don't anybody go away. We're just going to play the exit to the show and come right back into the captain's cabin and continue on with this. Because we've got about roughly 30 seconds, and we've got to bow out of the radio audience. So everybody over there on radio, I want to thank you for being here. Come over to youtube.com/Scotty Roberts and join us. And we're going to continue on with this where we're leaving off right now, because I want you to be able to hear the rest of this story. And I think it's interesting enough to not expand it into another day, but to continue it now. So all of those of you who are in the radio, live long and prosper. See you over here.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid Radio Program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Captain's Cabin. And Kalina, you make a great point over in the chat room. It's interesting how Lot's wife has turned into salt. Wasn't salt more expensive than gold? Yeah, in the day. But let me also tell you, what's Lot going to do? Bag up his wife and use it on his food or to preserve his vegetables? I don't think he's going to do that. So it is interesting, though. She gets turned into something that's valuable, but you're never going to use it for anything. So anyway, let me get rid of this header. Boom, there, that's gone. And let's get back into this. I want to almost have this run seamlessly when you watch this video back, because I want you to get the whole story. And now we can start talking about it. I'm not going to take any calls right away. You can line up if you want, but I want to finish this story because I think this is very interesting. And I think we need to get into the rest of this story. I knew it was long to begin with, and I had a couple of things I hit at the beginning, but I think that this is a really good thing for us to get into and think. Is it making you think? Are you thinking about the way you've been taught these stories? Are you thinking about the way that it works? So Yahweh, by this time, by the way, Abraham's is this man following his own agenda. This is what these guys did. We think that God walked with these people every day, and they were just checking, hey, God, how you doing today? Yo, Yahweh, I'm having coffee. Come on over. It didn't work that way. They had such limited contact. And it was like they just did their own things. Abraham's doing his own thing. Everything he's done so far, he's really kind of ignored. He's taken, with a grain of salt, and no pun intended, dealing with Lot's wife. Taken with a grain of salt everything Yahweh's told him and promised him, because Yahweh keeps changing the promise. And if he didn't, it sure looks that way in the text. So what are we supposed to ascertain from that? What conclusion are we supposed to draw? So what's Abraham doing? He's just doing his own thing. He's moving along, doing what he thinks is going to do to make him rich. Just like any guy, we do the things that make us money. That's what we're out to do. We're out for a better life. We don't know what kind of man, he was with that, except he was willing to let his wife, he pimped out his wife to Pharaoh to get the dowry, because he was afraid that Pharaoh would kill him for his wife. What did he do when he found out it was his wife? Sent her back, and he said, "Get out of here. She's married already. Why did you lead me to believe that?" That's a greater offense. Anyway, moving on. So Abraham's a man that follows his own agenda, and all of his sacrifices can't disguise his basic disregard for Yahweh's plans. So Yahweh must realize by this time what a difficult partner he has in Abraham. Not only was his ploy to remove Lot foiled, but Abraham also ended up with even greater wealth because of it. Abraham not only rescued Lot from the aggressors, but he also brought back all the loot that they had taken from Sodom and Gomorrah. So indeed, this is mentioned before Lot's brought back. It says, "And Abraham brought back all the goods, and also brought back his kinsman Lot." So Abraham gives his ally Melchizedek, here you go, Elderberry. He gives his ally Melchizedek, the king of Salem, a tenth of the goods. Even though Melchizedek says he should, "No, Abraham, you keep them. You keep them." Abraham does not need the spoils of his allies. He takes only what his own men acquired. And so here's a seriously rich man who doesn't need the small change offered to him by Melchizedek. And Abraham's generosity is the generosity of the extremely affluent. And he made it himself. He's a self-made rich man because he didn't get rich doing anything Yahweh promised him. So you can't blame Yahweh for his wealth. So Yahweh needs to reassert his divine control once again over Abram, somehow over the triumphant Abraham. And so after Abraham has easily defeated the 4 foreign kings with his own private A-team army, and he made it clear how filthy rich he is, Yahweh comes with the promise, "Don't be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, and you will have a big reward." That's a bit tame, isn't it? Because here's Abraham, filthy rich. He is the, I don't know. Who would you say he is? He would be compared to the Elon Musk of his day without the high tech. He's got all the wealth. He's the richest man around. And he's got his armies. And he's defeated the 4 kings. He's richer than richiness. And God says, "I'm your shield, and you have a big reward coming." What kind of inducement is that? But for the first time, Abraham actually bothers to answer back. He asserts the obvious, that he doesn't, "But I don't have a son. You promised me a son. You promised me descendants. I don't even have a kid. My wife's barren." This comment, though, isn't a disguised plea. Abraham is in the driver's seat at this point, so he can afford a rebuke to the effect of, "Let's cut the crap, Yahweh. You and I both know that these promises of yours are not really serious. It's just part of the game that you're setting up." He even adds to the insult by telling Yahweh he's already decided who his heir is going to be, one of his own servants, Eliezer, the steward of his house. "I've already decided my descendant's going to be Eliezer." So up to this point, there's been no overt confrontation, no defiance after all these years. But this provocation provocative response, this outburst of temper is not very wise on Abraham's part, because it's going to destroy the relationship unless it's immediately resolved. So gods can't allow humans to say publicly that they don't take them seriously. So in the thought world of the Bible, gods need humans. They need their worship. They're jealous of their worship. But humans need gods too. So both sides have to cool it, or the plot can't move on, and there'll be no Israel, no Bible, and no Western culture. So Yahweh makes the first move by saying that Abraham will have a son. You're going to have a son. I'm going to give you a son, Abraham. His seed will be as numerous as the stars. It's Genesis 15, 4-5. And Abraham needs to make a gesture too. And he does just that. Abraham believed this, it says, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. So in a modern movie of the story, Abraham would probably say something like, okay, I believe you, I'm sorry. Yahweh would say, fine, forget it, you're a decent guy. The two males would then embrace and go have a pint together. But it doesn't quite work out as neatly as that, because Yahweh goes over the top. He tells Abraham that he had called him from Ur to give him the land. Abraham's a bit offended. Yahweh hadn't said anything of the kind in Haran, although as we saw, Abraham knew the score. Yahweh had said only that he would show him the land. So Abraham remembers quite well what was said, and that he was not originally promised the land. So Abraham is again reminded that he's dealing with a duplicitous deity who seemingly lied to him and then is lying to him now about the past. It says, having believed in Yahweh for about one verse, Genesis 15:6. Abraham now remembers whom he's really dealing with, and he demands a bit of proof. What does he say to Yahweh? It says he believes, but then he goes right in and going, so how am I to know that this is what's really going to happen? Genesis 15:8. So God, tell me, how's this supposed to work? Tell me, show me something. Throw me a bone. So the struggle for the upper hand is still on. Is Abraham going to get his proof because he asked for it? Certainly not. Yahweh can't afford to lose face as well as credibility. So he reasserts his superiority by demonstrating his divine rank, impressing Abraham with a few special effects. Birds of prey come down, but Abraham scares them off. At sunset, he falls asleep, and a great darkness descends upon him. Abraham hears that, after all, the promises of the land will not come to his immediate descendants, but 4 generations later, after some unpleasant adventures. And after a few more effects, a smoking pan, a flaming torch, Abraham hears that his descendants will be given a huge amount of land, not just what you can see, as far as your eye can see, but a huge amount of land, from the Euphrates down to the Egyptian border. Now, this seems like the right kind of psychological pressure. Scare him a bit, put off the promise, tell Abraham everything is going to be more difficult, but finally make the prize a bit bigger. But in spelling this out, Yahweh lets slip that the original single Canaanite nation, which later became 2, Canaanites and Perizzites, has now become 10. Their iniquities may be piling up, but their immigration rate is too. So this might be part of Yahweh's plan, of course. He's a deity after all. He has a lot of other things on his plate. And he has other people to deal with besides Abraham. But what Yahweh has really done from Abraham's point of view is to confirm that even solemn and oft-repeated divine promises won't necessarily be kept. That's what God keeps showing him. So there are conditions. And by the way, this is why Christians, Jews alike, will say, well, Abraham was a man of faith because he believed God despite I think Abraham was smarter than that. He's like a lot of us, I think. So there are conditions involving other deals with other nations and specified but undisclosed amounts of iniquity. And it seems that this is the reward for daring to ask the deity for proof. He wants proof, Abraham does. So now we know, as Abraham only suspects, that even these promises are false. It says he believes it, but he acts like he believes it. The way we in Christianity today, or Judaism today, or even Islam today, say we believe this, but do we really believe that? Do we really believe that? We assert that we believe that, and we give all our proofs for saying why we believe that. Well, we don't really believe that. If we really believed these things, we would be living totally different lives, wouldn't we? So the promised extent of the land is never given to his descendants. Indeed, no land at all is occupied within the promised time frame. Yeah, you're right, Jeremy. Humans haven't changed much. So what does Abraham say? How shall I know? That's what he asked God. All he got were vultures, darkness, and a slightly more detailed promise. That's all God gave him. How am I going to know? Well, how dare you ask me that? Let me show you what I got. I got vultures and darkness and a little more detail to the promise. Nevertheless, the relationship has been restored rather than destroyed. And so the underlying negotiating positions are clear once again. And Yahweh says, trust me. And Abraham says nothing, possibly smiles. Okay. But each partner knows the other's holding something back. So what keeps them together is nothing more than male bonding, the realization that they prefer to have each other than not. And there's no deceit involved because there's no trust to betray. There's only enjoyment of the game of wills and wits and recognition of a worthy antagonist on each side. Do you see that? Do you see that in this story? There's no real deceit. There's no real animosity. There's a game being played. It's a game of wits between the two. So the game goes on. The subject is now posterity, descendants. For posterity is a prerequisite for fulfillment of the promise of the land. So Abraham was promised a son. But so far, he's done nothing about it. Even though he knows that his wife Sarah is barren, he even pawned her off to Pharaoh to get some money. Sarah herself suggests the obvious solution. She can have a surrogate child. That's in Genesis 16, verse 2. Abraham goes along with this, but as soon as Sarah's maidservant Hagar conceives, she starts putting on airs. And Sarah wants Hagar out of the house. How dare you put on airs? You're my surrogate. Well, I'm carrying the boss's kid. Sarah's like, no, I'll beat the shit out of you. You're my servant. You're my slave. And she wants Hagar out of the house, child and all. That's in Genesis 16. And Sarah deals really harshly with Hagar until she finally runs away. And at the risk of offending feminists here, I have to say that Sarah's petulant and inconsistent behavior almost justifies the male bonding. Don't get pissed at me for saying that, ladies. Women are no better than men. And here the victim of the woman is another woman. So why does Abraham, who happily handed Sarah over to Pharaoh, give in to her now and allow the pregnant Hagar to flee? Or why did Sarah, who seems quite capable of asserting herself at this point, give in to Abraham in Egypt when he turned her over to the Pharaoh to enter his harem? Obviously, having a son is not as important to Abraham as domestic harmony. So that's why he gives in to her. The future father of many nations is actually a reluctant parent. He's probably a much better uncle, really. See his relationship with Lot. So in fact, he needs to practice at fathering. So Yahweh sends Hagar back to Abraham's house to deliver her son. And Abraham responds to the demands of fatherhood, which Yahweh hopes will make him more amenable to having another son, the one Yahweh wants him to have. So once Abraham has passed through all the stages of parenthood and his son is at least 13, it's going to be time for Yahweh to tell Abraham and Sarah about their own son. Okay, now it's time. 13 more years go by. So we can pass briefly through Genesis 17. You only have to note that Yahweh comes back with another speech about a covenant and lots of descendants, just repeating what he'd already said, but this time only promising them all the land of Canaan, rather less than the previous offer. Now, which was going from the Euphrates all the way down to the Egyptian border. I'll give you all the land of Canaan. Wait, that's not what you said before. Wait, what about the middle promise? So, no wonder Abraham falls on his face and he laughs when he hears it. That's Genesis 17:17. He laughs. And he's waiting to hear two consecutive identical promises. And he's probably trying to conceal his laughter. It says Sarah laughs too. She's hiding behind the drape of the tent and she kind of laughs. Yeah, I'm going to have a kid. She laughs when she's told she's going to bear a son. She doesn't take Yahweh any more seriously than her husband Abraham does. Folks, read between the lines of these stories. Or maybe she finds the idea absolutely silly. Has it occurred to anyone that at 90 years of age, Sarah might not want to give birth to a child? She might be long past this promise crap. And is she hearing Yahweh's voice? Or is Abraham telling her? It does say that when God promised this to Abraham, she laughed. Perhaps that's why once she realizes that Yahweh is serious, it says she becomes afraid. And this was Genesis 18:15. She's 90. I got to tell you, my mom is 82. And the thought of my mom 8 years younger than Sarah having another kid, I joked with her about that not long ago. She was going out for dinner with some guy. I said, Mom, use protection. She goes, Scotty, I'm 82. I go, Mom. Oh, wait, I'm aging her. She's 81. And I said, Mom, I said, you don't want any more kids, do you? We just laughed. I mean, she knew it was a joke. But imagine being 90. Now she's afraid. What if you became pregnant at age 90? Nowadays, back then when people lived longer, according to the scripture, 90 might have been, 90 is like the new 50. I don't know. Now that we understand the dynamics of the Yahweh-Abraham relationship, we shouldn't have any problem understanding the famous negotiation in Genesis 18. Yahweh informs Abraham of his intention to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham takes a very bold initiative indeed. He starts out with 50. Remember his argument with his negotiation with God? What if you're going to destroy him? What if there were 50 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Yes, Yahweh. Will you destroy the righteous along with the wicked? Yahweh relents. He says, if there's 50, I won't destroy it. And Abraham keeps going, well, would you destroy the righteous along with the wicked? What about 45? If there are 45, I will not destroy it. Okay, how about 40? If there's 40, I will not destroy it. How about 30? And so on down to 10. If there are 10 righteous people, that probably comprises Lot's family. And in each case, Yahweh relents. And most commentators tease from this little dialogue a lesson about God's justice and mercy. But they don't read the whole story. The bargaining isn't about justice or mercy. It's just another bout of male bargaining. Yahweh wants to destroy Sodom, he says, because the inhabitants are wicked. But why tell Abraham? Why should Abraham even care? Give a rat's ass. Yahweh's decided to destroy Sodom anyway. Genesis 19. He also has no intention of being talked out of his plan. Yep, if there's 10, I won't do it. Meaning there aren't 10. But there's a reason he enjoys telling Abraham in advance. Lot. Abraham's nephew is in Sodom, living there. Naturally, in the bargaining, neither Abraham nor Yahweh mentions Lot, but they both know exactly what's going on here in this negotiation. Now that Ishmael is back in the picture, the plan for Isaac is underway. Lot has become redundant, even to Abraham. But Abraham is fond of Lot, wants to save him. Yahweh knows this, wants Abraham to wiggle and wriggle. And the two enjoy their little game of tit for tat for a while, and in the end, they reach an agreement. Lot escapes, and Yahweh destroys Sodom. Both are happy with this outcome. So, philosophical issues like the destruction of the righteous are, of course, a smokescreen. It's a technique of oblique negotiation. In case we can't see the obvious, the storyteller, who is not averse to giving us occasional clues, tells us that God saved Lot for Abraham's sake. Not because of any righteous people. God saved Lot for Abraham's sake, not because he was righteous. So Yahweh can't resist another go at Lot. Killing him would have alienated Abraham, but he goes as far as he can and gets rid of Mrs. Lot, which should take care of any chance for male offspring. Although, as the story goes on to tell us, Lot's daughters managed to find a way around that. Remember what has happened. Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. Lot's rescued by the angels. His wife looks back, turns into a pillar of salt, gone. He and his daughters dwell in a cave. They've lost everything. What do? They say, we can't let our father's lineage die. We have to go in and have sex with our dad. They get him drunk, and they have sex with him, and they both have kids. There's a wholesome family unit. I'm telling you. So, Sarah, what do you disagree with? I see you said you disagreed. Oh, man, that was 9 minutes ago. Sorry, or more. Sorry about that. I missed that when you said it. So it says you said that at 10:16, and it's now 10:23. So 7 minutes ago. I missed that. Remind me what you're talking about. Maybe we can talk about it as soon as I'm done getting through my material here. So in chapter 20 of Genesis, Abraham tries his sister trick again, this time giving Sarah to Abimelech of Gerar. He knows Yahweh doesn't like this trick, but he's teasing him, waiting to see how Yahweh's going to react. But Yahweh, not about to lose face again, intervenes to prevent anything from happening. Abimelech can't get an erection, nor can anyone else in his family. Genesis 26 and 18 tells you so. So he won't have to give Abraham the satisfaction of witnessing his disapproval. Yahweh makes poor innocent Abimelech into the villain, accusing him of sinning in Genesis 20, verse 3. And Yahweh refers, surely tongue-in-cheek, to the wily Abraham as a prophet who prays for Abimelech in Genesis 20. So this is a different game of wits. And it's Abraham's move now. When Abimelech confronts him, he decides to feign innocence. Trick, he says. What trick? I was only worried about Sarah, and she's my sister anyway. And so this time a third party, Abimelech, becomes the victim of point scoring between these magnificent BSers, God and Yahweh. Another stock episode in stories of male bonding. Now, lest you think I'm being sacrilegious or blasphemous when I say this, I am not. These two, Abraham and Yahweh, had this relationship going, and it was a guy thing, and they kept trying to one-up each other. It wasn't God the magnificent, omnipotent, holy God saying things, and if that was the case, He'd have wiped out Abraham long before. Abraham, you douchebag, I'm going to take you out if you don't do what I say. Now, once Abraham has his promised son, however, it's time for the showpiece of the entire story, the final game between these two buddies. Again, the innocent third party, this time Isaac, is the victim. The binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, as it's often observed, is told in a matter-of-fact way, with little apparent emotion. Yahweh simply tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. You know this promised son? Promised descendants, all of this? I want you to sacrifice him. The rest of the story is told in like manner. The pathos, literary critics unanimously tell us, is all in the reticence, the foregrounding. But this story ought to be read not on its own, but in the context of the Abraham-Yahweh relationship. Abraham has reacted passively to nearly every divine scheme, often showing little interest in what Yahweh's telling him to do. But recently he's become more assertive, even obnoxious. He rescues Lot, asked for proof of a promise, bargained over Sodom, provoked Yahweh by passing off Sarah as his sister again. And Yahweh struck back. But now it's time for a real lesson. Yahweh wants to force Abraham to admit that he cares for his son Isaac and for Yahweh's promises of offspring. Can you see all this? We see Abraham as being this great righteous patriarch through the whole story. At least that's how we learned it when we were kids in Sunday school or synagogue or in mosques. We learned all these things about these people. And we see them as people that went along with what God said. But you see this game is being played out. And finally, God's saying, is all these things I promise you, and you keep turning your back and doing your own goddamn thing, well, I'm going to fix that. I want you to take this promised son now and sacrifice him. He wants Abraham to plead or even to disobey so that he can forgive him and play the deity and finally assert the authority of the divine over the human. But Yahweh loses this bout. So what does Abraham do? He has a trump card. Isaac is more important to Yahweh than he is to Abraham. We realize this when Yahweh sends Abraham to one of the hills I will tell you, echoing Yahweh's call to Abraham to go to a land that he would be shown. There Abraham is to sacrifice Isaac, the son whom you love. Yahweh puts that in there. The son whom you love. You take not just your kid, you take the son whom you love to this hill I'm going to show you, and I want you to sacrifice him. Note that Yahweh asserts Abraham's love for Isaac, not Abraham. Abraham, once again, merely complies without a word of protest, as he did every step along the way. He just eventually did his own thing. But as with his initial call, Abraham's behavior doesn't indicate blind obedience. Although we've been given no reason to think that Abraham is particularly fond of Isaac, Yahweh does not think for a minute that Abraham's going to obey this crazy command. He expects Abraham to protest his love for Isaac and ask to be let off. Look how Abraham bargained for Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, for his part, knows Yahweh is not going to let Isaac die. He doesn't even bargain for him the way he bargained for his nephew. After all, whose idea was Isaac anyway, if not Yahweh's idea? So Yahweh wouldn't even let Ishmael die in the womb. So he ordered the pregnant Hagar to return to Abraham's house after Sarah had treated her so badly and she had fled. So Abraham, he's forcing Yahweh to the brink. And he makes Yahweh intervene. So when Isaac asks, "Where's the tomb for the burnt offering, Dad?" Abraham replies, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the offering, my son." There's no irony here. Or rather, this double irony. Abraham says what he knows to be true. Yahweh's not going to let it happen. Perhaps, too, he knows Yahweh's listening, and he's teasing Yahweh. That would add to the fun and to the score between these two guys. Everyone knows that Yahweh relents in the end, although most people don't appreciate that Abraham faced him down. Yahweh stays Abraham's hand as he raises the knife. Now, later Jewish embellishment of this story was quite right to redirect the focus of attention to Isaac. He alone did behave well. Just like Abimelech, he, the one decent person in the game, suffers as a result of the two males playing poker with each other. So Yahweh backs down. Abraham has successfully called his bluff and he won the contest. What can Yahweh do now? Deities aren't supposed to lose. When God created humans, he created something he had never created before, something that could use its own free will to tell him to take a powder. Because you have done this, you will indeed have what I promised anyway, Yahweh says. He's playing his favorite card. Because you've done this, you will indeed have what I promised anyway. Pretending that this was a test that Abraham had to pass in order for the promise to be fulfilled. And that what was already promised is now a reward. Is about the best Yahweh can do to relieve the situation. Now, true, and by the way, if you think God can't do that, that's not God. God knows everything. Well, remember the story of Moses. After the whole golden calf circumstance, Moses goes back up into the mountain. What is the scripture tells us that God says, these people, these Israelis, stiff-necked and stubborn and sinful people, I'm going to wipe them all out and I'm going to start the promise again in you. What was he saying? He was going to wipe out the promise he made to Abraham. I'm going to wipe them all out because of their sin, and I'm going to restart the covenant in you, Moses. What does the passage tell us? The story tells us Moses goes, God, you can't do that. You would be breaking your word to Abraham. And what does it say? It says in the passage, and God repented of the evil he was going to do. Moses changed God's mind. Or was God playing a game there too? He knew exactly what he was going to do and what Moses was going to do, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, Yahweh's managed to persuade theological commentators that he really won. But victory over such a weak audience is no compensation for defeat by a real man like Abraham, who emerges from anybody's reading of this passage better than from the usual one. Abraham knew that he wouldn't have to kill Isaac and that Yahweh was only bluffing. He knew this. Now, the story's nearly over. The storyteller in Genesis can't help telling us how many children Abraham's brother had. This is, by the way, Moses is the one that we're told wrote the book of Genesis. What good is it to Abraham to know that while his one son is not being sacrificed after all, Nahor is busy siring 8 sons? The very next event in chapter 23 is the death of Sarah and her burial in her own special cave. Maybe prompted by her death, Abraham at last begins to take care of his second son, Isaac. And we have a long account of the search for the wife of Isaac, for Isaac. And then Abraham proceeds to sire 6 more sons by another wife, Keturah, Genesis 25. But he sends all of them away, bequeaths everything to Isaac. That's his second son. His first son is Ishmael. Ishmael gets shit. Is this a final gesture of submission? Acceding to the divine wish that only Isaac is to inherit? Has the old schemer at last given in? He is, after all, very old now. He's very blessed, very rich, perhaps very tired. And the only thing left for him is to die. I hate to think of the story ending this way, mostly because of my sympathy for this Abraham character. But on reflection, it does seem right that at the end of his life, Abraham voluntarily does what Yahweh wants him to do. He has no more points to make. And he realizes, perhaps, that he has no land except the land he bought with his own money, and that he's not going to get any, promises or no. The only land he has is the stuff he bought. But then he had never taken these promises for anything more than what they were, cards in a game. And so, as in all good male bonding stories, the partners grow old, unless one of them is a deity, and they make peace. The children will have to negotiate with this same deity. The father hopes that they're going to have as much success as he. There's no need to stack the deck against them. It's a satisfying ending. The human voluntarily quits while he's ahead, when there's nothing more to be won. And he realizes that although he's going to die, his deity will not. Now, I find this story of male bonding rather convincing. What do you think of that? We'll talk about it in a few minutes. You can call in. We'll talk about it. It's clever. It's entertaining. But can we draw a serious moral from this story? A moral comparable to the great moral truths found by the writers of numerous commentaries and tracts and stuff like that? Why should I? A story doesn't have to have a moral. It's just a story. But there is one. There's one anyway. It's a moral for people who think Yahweh might be real rather than a character in some ancient writings, and who reckon that they too have to deal with him. Learn from this story. Learn from your predecessor. Don't trust his God. He doesn't trust you. And he won't tell you the truth. He's in the business of making promises that are never fulfilled. Abraham didn't achieve the ambition imposed on him to populate the world and receive his own allotment of land. But he knew that. He recognized that the promises were a kind of a running gag. Nothing more. Deities, like politicians, try to keep us dangling in the hope of things to come. Promises renewed, altered, repeated, revoked, supplied with new conditions. Be wise like Abraham. Take everything this or any deity says with a pillar of salt. Couldn't help but say that. Your weak card is your belief and your trust in the deity. And if you really believe in what he says, you lose. But if you call his bluff, pretend to go along with him while keeping your own counsel and taking whatever he decides to give you, you're going to prosper. If he wants to bless you, don't object, but let it not deter you from your own course or seduce you into groveling attitudes or gratitudes. Don't be like some of Abraham's descendants, physical and spiritual, who still believe in Abraham's God and who still look forward to his promises being fulfilled. One of them is born every minute. Now, does that sound rather dire, dark, blasphemous? Or is this maybe more accurate as to what was really going on between Abraham and God? Because if you look at that story, it was a big game of poker. Is that who God is? Is that what he's like? God does with his creation what he wills to do. He could wipe us all out in the snap of a finger. All of us, me included as an individual, all of us as a race, are hanging on because we believe that God is not going to destroy us and do something different. People say that's because he's a God of his word. But we've just shown, even in the story of Abraham, one of the first patriarchal stories in the Bible, that God kept changing his word to one up what Abraham was doing. It's an interesting foray into trying to decipher and understand who God is. Now, everything I presented you, I'm going to put this one caveat. I could be totally wrong, but I don't think I am. Now, you can call in and we will discuss this if you want to. We've got a half hour left, only 20 minutes left until we're officially out of here. But if you're sitting in the chat room and you want to talk, call in. Let me put the invite out there. Are you all here? You all want to talk? I know I said I was going to finish this, which I did. That would have taken 2 episodes to get through, and I could have done that. But I think it was worth pouring through in one session. We got other things we can go to after this. In this story, I do want to look at Melchizedek. I want to look at some other things Jeremy Hansen and I talked about. I'll tell you as we get there. I promise you a radio show that will deliver as far as your ears can hear. See, I didn't promise much there, did I? So, who wants to talk about it? If not, I'll put my voice to rest and go to bed. Let me remind you, Ruben Fast Horse, go hit the fundraiser and help he and Susie out. I will paste one more time that link so you can go see that. As long as we're taking a little break in the middle here now, kind of. This is where you can go see the GoFundMe and read up on Ruben and how he's doing. Let's take a little break. Let's take a pee break. I'll play a couple of the things we always play, and we'll be right back. So everybody sit there. Don't go away. And we'll be back as soon as we can. So sit tight. Be right back. Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here. Hey, folks, welcome back. This is the Captain's Cabin. And I can't do my pirate voice because I'm wrecking my voice already tonight. My voice is almost gone from whatever this virus is that our family has picked up. I don't see anybody calling in, so I'm thinking this might be a quiet evening. So we went an hour and a half with the show and might have lost all our conversers. So, and that's okay. So, what do you think of this stuff? How does this strike you when we hit a topic that is like a taboo? It's a forbidden type of approach to the Bible stories. I know, Sarah, you said you disagreed about something. If you're still out there listening, I'm not sure what it is you disagreed. Oh, you're coming in a minute. Good. We'll find out what you're thinking and what's on your mind. Anybody else who wants to come in, you can. And again, my eyes are goofy because of the stuff they put in them to dilate them. Rainey looked at me. I stopped and saw her at her store on the way back home from that. And she said, wow. She said, you got demon eyes. My pupils were so huge and black. I should have had her take a picture, but she didn't. So, yeah. And I got those goofy sunglasses, the little fold up ones that, throw away. I should have brought my own sunglasses with, and I didn't think of it. So, anyway, yeah, I got to sneeze. I feel it, but it's not coming in. Hold on. Ow. Hurt my throat. So, has anybody got anything you want to throw in? You got some 2 cents worth? I know that Sarah's going to come in. Anybody else? Jason, you out there? Professor Bauer? Jeremy? Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Scotty.
How you doing?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Year.
How about that? My year's going great so far. Only 363 days left with leap year.
Yeah. As soon as I woke up the first day back at work that morning, we lost power.
Yeah. Oh, that figures.
So then I was like, okay, this is how this year is going to start. So.
Yes. So, what are your thoughts? Jeremy says, I love this stuff because it's a much deeper conversation than the layman's taught us. And I think, and Jeremy's a very deep thinker on biblical and religious and spiritual topics. We have some great conversations. What are your thoughts? There was some place where you said that you disagreed with what I said, and I missed it when you said it, so I had no idea what the context was.
Well, that was a while ago. I probably forgot to.
Oh, okay.
But there is a thing that it's like you were saying earlier, we have to be careful how we interpret it. Because the way it sounded to me, the way you were interpreting it is by modern sensibility, which we can't do.
Yes. It was very tongue in cheek.
Yeah. You have to consider the time, the place,
right,
the importance of having son, the whole bloodline thing, who's going to be leading the tribe, survival. And it sounds like, over and over with Abraham, it's like, it's saying he's telling God, God is willing to say, I got this, but you have to trust me. Right.
Yeah.
So, and, it's sort of that kind of does, kind of don't, but, did Abraham in the beginning do exactly what God told him to do? Go occupy that land?
Well, he left Haran. He left Ur of the Chaldees.
Yeah. So, then,
But did he go occupy? No, he went through and he went to Egypt.
Right.
So
rather than do what he was told, he had to it got pushed on to different generations that he won't even get to see later on, based on this trust that God is going to take care of him and his tribe.
And it's like Moses. He didn't get to see the promised land because he disobeyed God. He equated himself with the divine. And God said, up, okay, you don't get to go into the land now. And it's like, oh, come on. And so is this the power of God? Is it the dealings of God? Is this what happens when you deal with a God?
Well, I mean, it's like later on when you deal with Job. I mean, Job had everything. God took it away mostly in one fell swoop. He lost his family.
He let the Satan, as it says in the passage, the Satan, the article before the name, the Satan came in and accused Job, and God said, you do whatever you want to Job, you just can't take his life. And so here is God saying, this is my creation. I can do whatever I want with him. He doesn't consider what this would do to Job. Maybe it's the lesson. In the long run, Job gets remarried. He has 10 more kids and has 10 times the wealth in the end. But how long does it take to get to that point? That's a great story. You can say it all in 2 sentences. But how long did it take for him to lose every child he had and to lose everything he had, but then to regain that and have more kids that grew up and were wealthy as well? It's a great number of years. He had to go through that and he didn't even have a lesson to learn. God was just trying to establish that he's powerful.
I think he definitely, learned a lesson. I mean, through Job, we learned.
Well, he learned things, sure, but was Job a non-righteous man that needed to be brought to God? No, he already trusted God. What's his famous line? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him.
Right, but I mean, in Job's case, it wasn't a consistent flow of faith. Through Job, we have to understand that we know that human beings are flawed, and even though they're flawed, there is a chance for redemption.
Yeah,
we don't really see. I mean, we see the major redemptive arc later on with Jesus, right? I mean,
yes.
So it's sort of planting the initial seeds that redemption is possible. There's no such thing as a person that is all good, all bad. Humanity has the capability to be either or to a certain degree.
Well, you can have a person who is very faulted, not all good, not all bad, but their trust in God might be unwavering. I knew people like that. Faulted people. They were good. They did some things that I didn't, whatever. You didn't really know much about their bad stuff, but they were people who trusted God. They believed, and they believed God will. What was it that Bill Fisher, the man that was my mentor, when he got sick again with cancer and was in hospice, I went to see him one day. I was only 15 at the time. Wish I'd known him as an adult, but he looked really weak. He was sitting up. His hair wasn't combed. He wasn't his smiley self. And I said, Bill, how you doing today? And he kind of looks up. He took off his glasses and he said, all he could do was quote a Bible verse. Took off his glasses and he said, my grace is sufficient for thee. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And he was that way when he wasn't sick. And he's that way when he's sick. He's a guy, was he a faulted man? Sure, he had his faults. I never really knew him at that age. But here was a guy that believed. And was Abraham a believer like that? Was the cultural context so different that we can't attribute that kind of belief to Abraham? His belief was maybe more core because, I don't know, they were closer to the God of the mountain that sends thunder had evolved into the God of Abraham. And Jeremy asked, do either of you think God shows favor to certain people in today's world? What do you think, Sarah?
Favor? It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't speak for non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would have to ask a non-believer that question.
Yeah. I would look at that and I'd say, well, who do we think God favors? Is God speaking to anybody the way he spoke to Abraham? Is he making promises? Or was that because that was way at the beginning of the covenants? And I know your belief system is different from what was my Christian belief system. But it was all these covenants. We used to call it stair-step dispensationalism. That God would make his covenants with man and it would usher in a new dispensation every time he made a new promise, a new covenant. There was the Adamic covenant, and then there was the Noahic covenant, then there was the Abrahamic covenant, and we call it stair step because each one took you one step up and a little further out from the beginning. The stair step. So Abraham,
the overall movement of the journey, I guess. But
yes,
it's like that. I don't know who quoted it. Who said it's a stairway to heaven and an escalator to hell.
There it is. Yeah.
But I mean, even from the beginning with Adam and Eve, God did the same thing. I mean, he said, okay, you have to go work for your food. You're going to experience pain with childbirth now, because you didn't listen. So, I mean, if that didn't happen, what would our life be like?
Is this why God changed his promises to Abraham? Because Abraham didn't quite do what he told him to do. Abraham kept bargaining with God. I'm going to do this thing instead. Now, you know what that says to me? We seem to think that these patriarchs had all this miraculous vision because they saw God and spoke to him. And yet they probably lived lives very much like ours when it comes to deity.
Right.
Their mountaintop deity experiences were encapsulated in dreams or visions, and then it's like I used to say about Joseph. He gets this dream from God about Mary giving the immaculate birth, conception, and you could see him getting up in the morning and having his coffee and looking out the window at the rising sun, scratching his butt and going, that seemed really real when I was having the dream, but now I'm awake and the glory of epiphany or deity making itself known to me is faded with the morning sun. And here I am now. I got to act on do I believe this or not? I think that's probably the way Abraham had it. And a lot of these patriarchs, they didn't have God walking with his hand in their pocket all the time or holding their hand or, piggybacking on top of Abraham's shoulders.
I mean, it depends on the type of relationship and how communication was made. Because even, back then, they either had seers or prophets, traveling along with them and their tribes, or it's like you said, possibly in the case of Abraham, God is imbuing either having a mind to deity conversation about what needs to be done. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I would personally, I would love to have a mind to God conversation. And you say, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, rather than have to figure it out myself and stumble around.
Right.
you know, but now I lost my train of thought. But
I do it all the time. It's late, midnight there.
Right.
So,
but with this case, with the case of Abraham, and I think it'll be nice if you have time later on, you should really do a show on Joseph, because
I love the story of Joseph.
Yeah. So because I mean, in the Bible, in most accounts, in the holy books, that there isn't much said about Joseph. So what we presume to know about Joseph is midrash, or
Yes.
assumption. I mean, yeah, if if his fiance came out and said, "Hey, guess what? I'm pregnant." Yeah, of course he's going to be not happy about it.
Right.
Until he's consoled by, the angel and that. And back then, if he said publicly, if he declared, Mary and I are breaking up because she's pregnant, she would have been killed.
Yeah. Well, it said he sought to put her away quietly.
Right.
So as not to bring shame on her.
Well, shame and death. Because, I mean, I'm assuming that, that he did care for her.
I think he did, and that's why he acted that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, he would still try to at least spare her life. And I'm not, maybe you would know more about this, but I mean, Joseph is the caretaker, protector of the two most important figures in Christianity, Mary and Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's through Joseph's care that those two were able to survive and grow older for a while, while he was alive.
Yes.
I mean, do Christians, I know they have like a Marian prayers and all that, but do they?
That's more Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I mean,
than it is.
But do they give veneration to Joseph, and like they do Mary?
Not that I know of. None that I know of. It said that Joseph died there was a certain point. I think he died obviously during the formative years of Jesus as a young man, maybe a teenager. He's just gone from the story. It's not that he is unimportant. I would think if he was still living, there would have been some reference to him in the Gospels beyond the birth story. Right. So I don't think he lived very long after that. Or he lived into the... Isn't this the carpenter's son? The Nazarenes said. So they recognized Jesus in his ministry as the son of the carpenter. That means they knew them together at one point, that this is the kid who was raised by the carpenter.
Right.
So they knew him, but he wasn't there anymore. It's only Mary that they refer to, and his brothers and sisters. So it's an interesting tale. I'd like to study more on Joseph. When you first said Joseph, I thought you were talking about Joseph, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat Joseph, sold into Egypt and so on. Different Joseph.
Right. But in
dad.
Yeah. So, but it seems like, the relationship between man and God, it's continuation of a relationship like between father and son, or father.
Yeah.
It's, you're trying to teach your kid how to, make good decisions, lead a good life, all this stuff, which, as a father, you know how that goes.
I do. I do. And it's interesting. Jeremy, I've had this question sent me. He says, I think God tells stories of mighty men to the angels. We have to be mighty in obedience, but free will makes us mystical. There was something. There was something in Christian theology that we learned was that that the angels were humanity was very different than the angels. Obviously, they were beings that were supposed to be in the spirit realm, the spiritual realm. What was there? There was a song that said "Old Gospel Hymn," which I'm not a big fan of the old gospel hymns. They're a little too storybookish to me. But this one said, the chorus said, he could have called 10,000 angels. Speaking of Jesus hanging on the cross, he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. He could have called 10,000 angels, but instead he died for you and me. That's not the song. There's one. It says, it said, glory, glory is what the angels sing. And I intend to help them make the courts of heaven ring. But when I speak redemption's story, they shall fold their wings. For angels never felt the joy that my salvation brings. Now, I disagree theologically. I don't think angels necessarily all have wings. I don't think they're angels certainly aren't the passed on souls of the saints, of the believers. They're different created beings. But there's something to that song that always said, when I sing about the story of redemption, they have to fold their wings and be quiet because they'll never experience that. They'll never experience the free will of being able to choose God's redemption and salvation. So, does God tell this? Go ahead.
No, I was saying overall, there seems to be an excessive value placed on free will.
Yeah.
Because I think I've probably even told you before. I mean, because the way the original Genesis story, and that time when we were discussing about the origins of the jinn and all that.
Yes.
So what caused God to value humanity above angels or jinn is that humanity was able to put aside their free will and said, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, I'm going to be good, I'm going to be bad, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And again, we see that constant theme of free will. We're given a choice. It's like, choosing to have, you can either have junk food or a healthy breakfast.
Right.
And, your parents want you to choose one or to have specific one in mind, but, ultimately the choice is yours. And then you have to reap the consequences of those choices. As and that's how you're going to learn. It's not like,
That's like the other day, the last couple of days of Christmas vacation. My son Flynn he went over to a friend, spent the night. They came over here. They played video games all day and all night. We didn't cook for him. We said, there's food upstairs in the fridge. Rainey made soups and there was meat for sandwiches and, a brisket that had been done for barbecue. And, go ahead and help yourself, guys. What did they eat all weekend? They ate donuts, cookies, chips, and soda pop. That was it. Because I remember asking, what did you guys eat anyway? I don't know. It just made me think of when you said we can make a choice. We can eat well or not eat well. What are you going to have for breakfast? Donuts and chips and soda pop. So anyway, that's what it made me think of.
And you consider the thin scope of humanity of what we can see within the visual spectrum. And if you look at what angels compare angels to us, they have probably infinitely more sight than we do.
Yeah.
And yet, that to the upset, we are valued more. We are valued placed on higher on the totem pole than they are. I mean, it's no wonder, Satan got pissed off and Lucifer got pissed off.
Well, Kalanis just said, in a way, the angels know free will. They too were punished for it. Satan and his followers were kicked out of heaven and sent to hell. There it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with the book.
Thanks, Elderberry.
The book of Enoch. No, it's not Enoch. Well, the Watcher Angels.
Yes.
They had the choice. They were supposed to watch over humanity rather than intimately interact with them.
Yes.
So I mean, to me, in my mind, that makes them more, since they have the ability to have free will and they had their powers or whatever, they seem to be more like jinn than actual angels.
Yeah.
So in Islam, angels are like extensions of God. It's like a pinky finger extension of fingers. There's no free will. God says go do that, they go do it without question.
Right.
But
and by the way, I'll answer Elderberry. My voice, because I've used it all night, it's croakier, but there are times where it comes out and it feels very clear. I can't even clear it. I feel it in my throat. I have a timbre to my voice tonight that I wish I had all the time. But without the throat problem, I feel bassier and brassier, and and timberier. So he says your voice, it seems like your voice is cleared up. It has, only because I can talk, but it's also raspy. I don't know if you can hear little tidbits of raspy in there because I talked all night. But which talking all night leads me to, Sarah, it's 11:15 here, and I got to get out of here. So I don't know if you have more you want to say or bring up on this point, but we're going to talk more about this stuff.
Sure, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming in and talking. And giving your 2 cents worth means a lot to me. And I appreciate your input. All right. So I'm going to say goodnight to you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. Good night. All right, everybody, guess what? It's that time. It's that time to go. So tell our kids, time for night-night. Rainey will say to our 14-year-old son, Flynn, Mommy loves you. It's time to go night-night. And he's like, oh. I mean, he loves the attention, but she does it to tease him a little bit. So I will tell you all the same thing. So it's time to get out of here. It's time to go night-night. And we will see you again next time. By the way, if you go over to YouTube and you listen to any of my old shows, they've been just relentlessly going through all my videos from the last 4 years, finding every place that I used a piece of music. And I have to go in and they demonetize it because you played 30 seconds of a piece of music. And so I've been going in and just saying, just mute it. So you go in, there's places where the music comes up underneath my voice in those pre-record days. And it sets such a great mood when I was closing off a show. And I had to mute it from when the music starts. So you see me talking and it just cuts out to blank. But I said, you know what? If the person who owns that little clip of music needs to make their money off of it, off of my show, I understand the copyright issue, but I don't understand the not just letting it go. It's not a big deal. How many people listen to my shows? It's just a way that YouTube doesn't have to monetize my shows. So I just let them go. And we mute that section, that 30 seconds of the show at the end. You miss out on it. So that's why I can't play my own ad anymore, because Rainey and my little girl narrating the ad, it's permanently locked to the music I put under it, which is a Gaelic Storm piece that I threw underneath the ad 8 years ago, not realizing there would be a copyright issue with it. So, but they're going in and they're rooting all of those out in all my old shows. I've been hit with a plethora over the last 4 days of, oh, you got a copyright violation on this, at least 20 times. And I have to go in and mute out the section. So you'll find that in it's YouTube. YouTube's good for getting your show out. They're really bad at that kind of stuff. They find ways to, they have to pay the people, the big companies, but they don't pay the little guys. They find ways to not have to pay them, which is sad. So every 6 to 7 weeks, I make about $120 off this show. So and they don't want to make sure they don't have to pay that either. So if you run into that in old archives, a bunch of them were in the series I did on Native Americans and the conquering of the American West. When was that? 4 years ago I did that series? 3 years ago at best? So you're going to run into that. Anyway, whatever. There it is. It exists. I'm just belly aching about it. So, yeah, that's the trouble I get into, Kalina. So I used a little clip of music and in the background. So with that, there's a negative we'll go out on. Let's go out on a positive. I hope you enjoyed this show. We will be back on Friday night, hopefully with another show like this one that you'll enjoy. I really enjoy this stuff. So I hope you do too. So until then, live long and prosper.